So let me ask you one more question before I let you go, because you brought this up when you were on the show last time, and a lot of people got upset about it. You were just in China, and you were talking about the responsiveness of the Chinese political system to the actual needs of their people, and you were saying that it was very responsive, unlike our system here in the United States, whereas we're seeing play out right now. We're in an unbelievable crisis, and the ruling elite get together and they start passing laws that have no help to the people who are in crisis, right? So but in China, you say that wouldn't happen. Now, a lot of people are like, what, are you crazy? That's a fascist government. There's no freedom. There's no liberty. And so what do you say to that? Of course, there's no freedom and no liberty, but are they responsible or responsive to, are their leaders responsive to their citizens? And if so, why?
I would say that, and thank you so much for asking this, because I've been wanting to talk about it in so many different avenues and areas, because I get a lot of heat for this. I mean, I get a lot of heat from this from the radical left, what small radical left that exists in the United States. I get a lot of heat. When I was at the Left Forum last year, the year before the one that was canceled this year, most of the questions to me were, well, why do you support China? And I would say that, you know, the conception of liberty and freedoms in the Western sense are so limited, because those freedoms and liberties are always narrowly applied to private capital and the capitalist class. It's their freedoms to exploit. It's their freedoms to allow you to vote for whatever political party is going to oppress you for the next 2 years,
Right.
4 years, whatever. And so, but more concretely to China, I think that when you have a political system that's led by the Communist Party, but it is a socialist political system that follows a plan and that actually does hold elections. People don't understand that there are multiple political parties in China. It's just the Communist Party is in the lead. What you had in China in 1949 was a revolution.
Can I just stop? Can I just stop you there for a second? So I thought it was one party rule. You're saying there's multiple political parties in China?
There are multiple political parties that make up the state council in China. It's that the Communist Party is what is known as the vanguard party. And so that party is unquestionably the most influential over mostly educational affairs and in terms of guiding policy. But there are multiple political parties in China. There are right-wingers in China. I mean, you can go to China and meet them. They're not so pleasant. But they don't hold power. So one thing that China really pays attention to is to the fact of economic rights. So bourgeois political rights are not really something that much of China and much of the population really wants. They had bourgeois political rights prior to the 1949 revolution, and that led to the deaths of tens of millions of peasants and to the utter poverty of most of the population, where the life expectancy was 35 years of age. Not something that people in China want to go back to. After the revolution, with the Communist Party in the lead, what you've had is a decrease in poverty, especially absolute poverty, which as of this year has been eradicated. You have no homelessness in China. You have the right to a job in China. So even the migrant workers, which everyone wants to talk about as being super exploited, most of them are peasants who own land. They come to the cities, they work, they make a higher wage, then they go back for part of the year to live with their families on land that they own. So the commanding heights of the economy in China are nationalized. They are property of the state. So here in the United States, where we have big monopolies owning the energy sector, owning the healthcare sector, owning all sectors of society that basically take care of our needs, in China, those things are owned by the state. And those things are available to the entire population. In China's initiatives, its government is primarily interested in how do you extend economic rights to everyone in a situation where just 70 years ago, you were one of the most poorest countries in the world that was being throttled by foreign powers. A scenario that continues to this day. It's just the difference is that working people, instead of being the oppressed and exploited class, are now the ruling class in China. They actually have the most influence over society. It's just not the influence that we're used to in the United
So,
States. Here, we're used to having political power by voting and being on the outside of the state. In China, the state answers to the people, or there's massive reforms, and there's been massive reforms that have happened in the past in China. There's been leadership changes.
Okay.
There are executives. There are Communist Party leaders who are banished all of the time at the local, all the way up to the state council level. That is the relationship of the people to the party in China. That's the relationship of the people to the state, and you really do see it if you go there. You really do see it if you spend some time there, and if you just see what China is doing around the world. It's not bombing other countries. It's not, talking about how private capital needs to be worshipped and how the market is the best thing in the world. It's talking about, well, how do we expand things like anti-poverty initiatives? How do we work with other countries on a win-win basis? How do we alleviate climate change and eradicate it altogether? If you go to China, you'll see the complete investment in renewable energy to a degree I've never seen anywhere else in the world. And actually, it doesn't exist anywhere else in the world because China leads in that sector. They lead in infrastructure like high-speed rail. And it's because working people are actually in charge. Those things could not be possible if working people were in charge. There's no interest for capitalists to invest trillions of dollars in things like roads, bridges, high-speed rail, which primarily benefit working people. They don't benefit investors at all.
I was always under the impression that, China's this horrible one-party rule. They get to you get to have an election, but they get to choose who the people are that you get to vote for. You don't get to choose. And things of that nature. And of course, they don't have internet, right? Everything's censored over there. You live in a completely censored state, totalitarian. Would you consider it a total? I mean, so I guess you're making it sound like Denmark when a lot of people think it's like, the Gulag. So people are having a hard time when you come here and say how great their form of government is and how responsive it is to the people. And we say that they can't even do a Google search. You see the disconnect, right? Where people can't square that circle.
Well, it's very different from Denmark in a lot of ways because Denmark is not led by a vanguard party that represents a large portion of its population. The Communist Party in China is 90 million deep. I mean, that is a large portion of the general population in China of 1.4 billion. And in China, the censorship, all of these issues when it comes to the framing of China as an authoritarian state, don't usually consider the fact that China right now is under siege by imperialism. That hasn't changed despite the fact that it's the second largest economy in the world, that it has advanced to a degree where it can compete on the world stage economically. It is still the case that China is a developing country, and it's one that continues to be surrounded along its borders and in the Pacific by the U.S.'s pivot to Asia. It is constantly being meddled with internally. There are CIA agents that run all up and down China trying to overthrow the government. There is a right wing in China that wants to overthrow the government. It's tiny. It's dispossessed of any kind of political power at the state level, but it exists and it wants to create problems. You have cult followings like the Falun Gong, which here in the United States run ads all the time in the New York Times, and they're directly funded by the NED and other organizations of the state that they're far-right fascists that want to overthrow the Communist Party rule in China because they see the Communist Party as completely antithetical to their interests in turning China into another playground of the capitalist class. In China, that's not the case. People like to think it is. They like to think that here in the United States and the West, they think China is this playground of the capitalist class. But in fact, the state is in command of society, and that command is led by a communist party, which is dedicated to a plan that meets markers for the people first and their economic rights. And all growth, economic and political, that happens has to follow that plan, or there's real struggle and consequences. And you see that right now in China, where the president, Xi Jinping, has waged a really deep anti-corruption campaign, which is seeking to root out these capitalist-minded folks who have been running away with profits at the expense of the plan. You don't have that here, right? You don't have people being punished at the level of the government for doing wrong towards the people. And that's the difference, right? There's an academic, Eric Lee, who talks about it, who was interviewed by John Pilger in his documentary, The War on China. And he said, the difference between the United States and China is that in China, the government is in command over the market. The market does not control government policy. And in the United States, the market controls all government policy. That's the difference. And
Wow,
you
that is
you
the
can
difference.
really do see it when you have a scenario where, unlike in China, where wages have been increasing for all workers by like 10%, by an average of about 10% over the last 40 years, in the United States, it's been the exact opposite. In the European world, it's been the exact opposite. And why is that? But people don't want to ask these questions because there's so much racist vitriol that's thrown at China. It's considered this yellow peril authoritarian regime that deserves every single act of war thrown at it. But in reality, China's political principles, what it's promoting, regardless of whether you think it's being applied correctly or not, a lot of people have their own theories and ideas, are things that we should be aspiring to. Win-win cooperation, a multipolar world where there's more than one nation calling the shots around the world. The idea of a Belt and Road Initiative where all countries are working together on the basis of development that focuses on the poorest countries first and gets everybody up to a level where people's needs are met and that people can live in a prosperous way. All those things are things that I think progressives like. And the idea that climate change is the biggest existential threat to humanity. That's what China goes to the UN and says all the damn time. If you just read what their representatives are talking about.
But then people would say, yeah, but they have the worst pollution. They're still building coal plants, things like that, right?
They would say that, but China does not have the worst pollution in per capita terms, which is the most important measure. And also, they're the leading force in reducing their emissions by investing in real renewable energy and attempting to build a political and economic climate worldwide where not only is everyone else up to speed, but then they can go farther. Because what we sometimes forget is that in terms of the global economy, the United States is still the hegemon worldwide. The European world attempts to be the hegemon alongside the United States. And they're the principal force trying to squeeze China and squeeze all states that seek to take a different path and destroy them ultimately. And that creates a very difficult environment for a country of 1.4 billion people to develop in a way where, one, economic needs can be met, and two, the environmental needs can be met. It's a very hard balancing act when you're talking about economic and military warfare at your doorstep all of the time for the last 70 years. That's something that people, I think, need to have a little more empathy toward, especially here in the United States and the West, where we are the epicenter of imperialism.
Yeah, so they've developed a system that's taken people out of poverty like no other system in the history of the world. But I still think you should be censored for saying things nice about China. I'm all for it. We should shut down Danny Haiphong's pro-China talk.
Oh, people are losing it.
Are they?
Yes.
People are going nuts, Danny.
Yeah.
People are going crazy at this bullshit.
I don't want to hear this about China.
Fuck China. I want to be able to Google. So, you know what, Dan? We should come on and do... We should have you on and we should break down what's happening in China because everybody's going to be talking about China going forward like they were talking about Russia in the last 4 years. They're going to be talking about China for the rest of their life going forward. So it's about time people understood what's exactly going on so they didn't get caught up in bullshit propaganda. And one of the things that people don't realize is that China's system, whatever you want to say about their system, it has raised more people out of poverty than any other system in the world. And why? One of the reasons would be because that's actually one of the goals of their system. That's not a goal of the capitalist system in the United States. It's but anyway, so it's a longer discussion. So thanks for addressing it, and we would love to have you back on to talk about it.
Of course. One last thing though, real quick, is that I'm not saying China is a pure society. I think that the people in the United States and the West have this myth of purity, as if under an imperialist siege that anything can be pure. What I'm saying is that China is leading a progressive movement and honestly a socialist movement that may not look like what we want it to look like from the outside, but is actually achieving real things to the benefit of its population, but also to the world in a lot of ways. And that has to be considered in our analysis. So yeah, for sure, definitely a longer conversation. But yeah, I'm definitely willing to come back on, and I look forward to it.
Okay. Danny Haiphong from the Black Agenda Report. Everybody check him out. Thanks for being our guest. Thanks for making time.
Of course. Take care.
Okay. Hey, this is the part where I tell you where our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then I would tell you to go join our premium, but nobody has a fucking job. So why don't you just enjoy the video?